The day my mother told me this house was only for real family was the day I stopped believing in fairy tales. I'm Emma Taylor, and I spent every penny of my savings, $86,700, on the crumbling Victorian my childhood memories were built in. The very same house my mother sold out from under my grandparents when they could no longer care for themselves. The house where I once played princess and dreamed of forever. As I stood there on those familiar porch steps, shopping bag of takeout, in hand, offering to share my first dinner in my new home, her words sliced through me sharper than any knife ever could. "This house is only for real family," she said, lips curled into that perfect country club smile that never quite reached. Her eyes. Then she closed the door in my face without even a goodbye. But that cold dismissal wasn't the true heartbreak. The devastating revelation came later, understanding that in her eyes, I had never really been real family to begin with. The whispered phone calls that stopped when I entered rooms. The childhood achievements conveniently forgotten while my half-brother Jason's mediocre efforts were celebrated with lavish parties. The graduation photos where I somehow always ended up half-cropped out. It all converged into this moment of crystal clarity on my new old doorstep. Today, 18. Months after that rejection, they're the ones standing at my door, not with takeout and olive branches, but with outstretched hands, asking for the keys to the grand home I've resurrected from ruins. The home my mother once discarded like yesterday's fashion, but now suddenly remembers belongs in the family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers as I stood in what would become the master bedroom of my Victorian restoration project. February in Millfield wasn't known for its hospitality, and this particular Tuesday seemed determined to remind me of that fact. Water stains decorated the ceiling in abstract patterns, and beneath my feet, the hardwood floors, once gleaming with the warm honey tones I remembered from childhood, were now dull and warped from years of neglect. I set down my thermos of coffee on the windowsill and pressed my palm against the cool glass, watching droplets race each other down the pane. Outside, the garden my grandmother had once nurtured into a neighborhood showcase lay dormant and, overgrown, barely recognizable under winter's gray blanket. The rose bushes she'd tended with such devotion were now tangled masses of thorns. The stone pathway leading to her prized gazebo was cracked, with weeds pushing stubbornly through the fractures. This wasn't what I had imagined when the real estate listing caught my eye 3 months ago. Historic Hamilton Estate needs TLC, the description had read, a magnificent understatement if ever there was one. But the moment I saw the address, my heart had stuttered in my chest. 347 Wisteria Lane, my grandparents' house, the home where I'd spent every summer until I was 12, where the concept of family had felt sacred and secure, until it wasn't. I unscrewed my thermos and took a sip of coffee, now lukewarm. The bitter taste matched my mood as I recalled the conversation with my mother just days after I'd signed the closing papers. "You bought what?" Her voice had risen an octave over the phone. "Emma, tell me you're joking." "I'm not joking, Mom. I bought Grandma and Grandpa's old house." Silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. Then, "Why would you waste your money on that dilapidated mess?" "The neighborhood has gone completely downhill." "It hasn't gone downhill," I corrected her. "It's changing. Young families are moving in, artists, small business owners. It's revitalizing." "It's gentrifying," she countered with a sniff, "which means you overpaid for a teardown." I'd taken a deep breath, reminding myself that engaging with her criticism would only lead down familiar, painful paths. I didn't. "Call for your real estate advice." "I thought you might want to know that a place that was in our family for generations is back with us." "Back with you mean? And what are you planning to do with it?" You don't know the first thing about restoration. Your graphic design job barely pays your apartment rent. I'm going to live in it, I'd said firmly. And I've been promoted to creative director. I can work remotely now, and the cost of living here is lower than in the city. Her laugh had been sharp, dismissive. You'll give up after a month when you realize what you've gotten yourself into. Call me when you're ready to sell. Jason might be interested once he's done with medical school. It could be a decent investment property for him. I should have been used to it by then. The way she positioned my half-brother as the solution to every problem, the deserving recipient of every opportunity. But it still stung, even at 32. A sudden crack of thunder pulled me back to the present moment. I checked my watch, nearly noon. The contractor would be arriving soon to assess the plumbing situation, which, based on the alarming noises coming from the pipes, was dire. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Claire. My best friend since college. Survival check. Has the house eaten you alive yet? Also, did you call that electrician I recommended? I smiled and typed back. Still breathing. Electrician coming Thursday. Currently playing Count the Water Stains while waiting for the plumber. Current. Tally. 27. 3 dots appeared immediately. Amateur numbers. Didn't my Victorian hit 40 before we fixed the roof? Hang in there. It gets better. Dinner tomorrow? I'll bring actual food that doesn't come from a can. God, yes. I'll provide the wine and the horror stories. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and moved toward the hallway, careful to avoid the spot where I knew the floorboards had rotted through. The house had good bones, the inspector had assured me, but those bones needed serious medical attention. The staircase creaked under my weight as I descended to the first floor. Despite everything, I couldn't help but run my hand along the banister, smooth from generations of palms just like mine. My grandfather had carved intricate vines and tiny hidden flowers into the dark wood, a detail my mother had always deemed unnecessarily ornate, but that I had traced with fascinated fingers. As a child, the front door's antique brass knocker suddenly sounded, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the largely empty house. The plumber was early. I opened the door to find not the expected middle-aged contractor, but my mother, immaculate in a camel. Hair coat, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed despite the rain. Behind her stood Jason, looking uncomfortable in his medical school sweatshirt, and his fiancée Melissa, whom I'd met exactly twice at family events. "Mom," I said, surprise making my voice higher than intended. "I didn't know you were coming by." She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping past me into the foyer, her expression a complex mixture of distaste and nostalgia. We were in the area for Jason's internship interview at Millfield General. I thought it was time to see this. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Project of yours. Jason offered an awkward half wave. "Hey, Em, place looks." He trailed off, clearly searching for a diplomatic word. "Exactly like what you'd expect from a house that's been empty for 7 years. I finished for him. It's a work in progress." Melissa peered around curiously. "I think it has character. Those crown moldings are original, aren't they?" I nodded, unexpectedly grateful for the olive branch. "Yes, they're all original. The craftsmanship is incredible. You don't see this kind of detail in modern construction." My mother sniffed, running a finger along a dusty windowsill. "Character is real estate code for needs to be gutted. Honestly, Emma, what were you thinking? This place is enormous. The heating bills alone will bankrupt you." "I'm installing new energy-efficient windows next month," I replied, striving to keep my voice even. "And updating the insulation." "With what money?" she asked, turning to face me directly. "You've never been practical about finances, just like your father." The comparison to my father, who had left when I was 4 and whom she blamed for every financial hardship she'd ever faced, was a familiar weapon. "I've been saving for years," I said, "and I qualified for a historic preservation grant that will cover part of the exterior restoration." Jason wandered toward the living room, his gaze traveling up to the elaborate ceiling medallion. "I remember this place from when we were kids. Grandpa used to let me ring that old ship's bell on the back porch." "The bell is still there," I said, seizing the chance to change the subject. "It needs polishing, but it works." My mother followed, his gaze, and for just a moment, her expression softened. "Dad loved that bell. Mom always complained about the noise, but he rang it every evening at sunset. Said it was a sailor's tradition." For a brief, fragile second, we were just a family remembering a beloved grandfather. Then her phone chimed, and the moment shattered. She checked the screen, then tucked the phone back into her purse. "We should go. Jason's interview is in an hour, and we still need lunch." She looked around once more, her gaze calculating. "When you're ready to admit this was a mistake, let me know. The sensible thing would be to sell this place to a developer. The lot alone is worth something, even if the house is a teardown." "I'm not selling," I said firmly. "This is my home now." "For now," she agreed with a knowing smile. "We'll see how long that lasts once winter really sets in and you're dealing with frozen pipes and a mortgage you can barely afford." As they turned to leave, Jason hung back slightly. "It really could be great, Em," he said quietly. "I always liked this old place." I smiled at him, reminded that our complicated sibling relationship wasn't entirely his fault. "Thanks. I think so too." "Let's go, Jason," my mother called from the doorway. "Emma probably has, whatever it is graphic designers do, to get back to." And then they were gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of my mother's expensive perfume and the heavy weight of her disapproval. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The house seemed to exhale with me, its ancient timbers settling with a sympathetic creak. "Just you and me now," I murmured to the empty hallway. The plumber arrived 20 minutes later, a cheerful woman named Darla with graying hair tucked under a baseball cap and decades of experience written in the lines of her face. "Well, honey," she said after crawling out from under the kitchen sink, "I've got good news and bad news. Good news is your main water line is intact. Bad news is pretty much everything else needs replacing." She wiped her hands on a rag and gave me a sympathetic look. "We're talking about a complete overhaul of your plumbing system." I swallowed hard. "How much?" She named a figure that made my stomach drop. "I know it's steep," she added, seeing my expression. "But this is one of those things you don't want to piecemeal. Do it right once. You won't have to think about it again for decades." I nodded, mentally rearranging budget numbers. "Can we do it in stages? Prioritize the bathrooms and kitchen first?" "Smart thinking," Darla agreed. "Let me work up a phased approach for you. Might save you some upfront costs at least." She glanced around the kitchen, taking in the vintage tile and ancient appliances. "This your first old house renovation? That obvious, huh?" She chuckled. "You've got that shell-shocked look I see on all the first-timers. Don't worry, it's normal. These old houses, they test you at first. See if you're worthy." She tapped a wall affectionately. "But once they decide you're keeper, they give up their secrets." "Secrets?" I echoed. "Oh, sure. Every old house has them. Hidden spaces, buried treasures, forgotten stories." She smiled, revealing a crooked front tooth. "My advice? Listen to what she's telling you. These walls have seen generations come and go. They remember." After Darla left, promising to email her estimate by evening, I wandered through the downstairs rooms, trying to see past the peeling wallpaper and water damage to the home this place had once been. The home it could be again. In the dining room, I ran my fingers along the built-in china cabinet where my grandmother had displayed her prized collection of blue willow porcelain. I could almost hear her voice explaining the pattern's legend to me. Star-crossed lovers transformed into doves, forever united in their flight across an azure sky. "The pattern always tells a story," she'd say, carefully handling each piece as if it contained actual magic. "Remember that, Emma. Everything precious tells a story if you pay attention." My mother had sold the entire collection at a state auction. After my grandparents moved to assisted living, "Just dusty old plates," she'd declared, despite my pleas to keep at least a few pieces for sentimental value. The memory stung, but it also hardened my resolve. This house wouldn't meet the same fate. Not while I had anything to say about it. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from an unknown number. "Hi, Emma. This is Tom Whitaker from Millfield Historical Society. Claire mentioned you bought the old Hamilton place on Wisteria. We'd love to help with your restoration if you're interested. We have original photos and blueprints in our archives." I felt a spark of excitement, the first genuine enthusiasm, since my mother's visit had cast its familiar pall over my day. I typed back immediately, "That would be amazing. When can I see them?" The response came quickly. "I'm at the society office most afternoons. Tomorrow work for you? Around 2? Perfect, thank you." Just like that, a day that had started with rain and family tension had found its silver lining. I tucked my phone away and looked up at the ceiling medallion Jason had noticed earlier. Beneath years of paint and grime, I could just make out delicate plasterwork, acanthus leaves, and what appeared to be small birds in flight. "We're going to bring you back," I promised the house softly. "Both of us. We just need a little time." That night, I slept on an air mattress in what would eventually be my bedroom, bundled in layers of sweaters and blankets against the February chill. The old radiators clanked and hissed, providing just enough heat to prevent freezing, but nowhere near enough for comfort. I should have been miserable. By all objective measures, the cold, the isolation, the enormity of the task ahead, my mother's cutting words, I should have been second-guessing every life choice that had led me to this moment. Instead, as I drifted toward sleep listening, to the rain's gentle percussion on the roof, I felt something unexpected unfurling in my chest. Peace. For the first time in years, perhaps since childhood summers spent in this very house, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The Millfield Historical Society occupied the town's original library, a dignified brick building with green copper trim that had aged to a distinctive patina. Inside, the space maintained its scholarly atmosphere with towering bookshelves, reading tables, and the unmistakable scent of old paper and wood polish. Tom Whitaker turned out to be younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s with wire-rimmed glasses and an enthusiasm for architectural history that bordered on evangelical. He greeted me with a firm handshake and immediately led me to a large table where he'd already assembled a collection of materials. The Hamilton house, though it was the Prescott house originally, was built in 1887 by Edward Prescott for his wife Louisa, Tom explained, carefully opening a large archival folder. Prescott owned the lumber mill that supplied most of the construction in Millfield during that period, spared no expense on his own home, as you might imagine. He laid out a series of black and white photographs showing the house in various stages of its life. I leaned forward, captivated by images of my renovation project in its original glory, gingerbread trim intact, gardens meticulously maintained, even a horse-drawn carriage in the circular drive. My great-grandfather Richard Hamilton purchased it in 1923, I said, connecting the timeline. It stayed in our family until 2016, Tom finished, consulting his notes. When it was sold to Lakeside Development Corporation, he glanced up. Your grandparents were Burton and Margaret Hamilton, correct? I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. They didn't want to sell. They had to move to assisted living, and my mother handled the arrangements. I paused, unsure how much personal history to share with this virtual stranger. She convinced them the house was too expensive to maintain standing empty. Tom's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were kind. Unfortunately, that's a common story with these old family homes. Maintenance costs, property taxes, it adds up. Lakeside planned to demolish it for a small subdivision, but they ran into resistance from preservationists and zoning issues. Lucky for the house, they went bankrupt before they could follow through. Lucky for me, too, I said. Otherwise, I never would have had the chance to buy it back. Back in the family. Tom nodded approvingly. That's the best outcome for these historic properties. Someone with a personal connection, a reason to preserve not just the structure, but the stories it holds. He pulled out a large rolled document and carefully unfurled it. The original architectural blueprints, dated 1887 and signed with a flourishing E.A. Somerset architect. These are incredible, I breathed, taking in the detailed drawings. Look at the precision in these details. Somerset was one of the leading Victorian architects in the Northeast, Tom said. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. Now, one detail you might find particularly interesting. He pointed to an area of the dining room wall. See? This notation? It indicates a hidden compartment behind the china cabinet. Service access, ostensibly, but these were sometimes used as safes or document storage. My pulse quickened. Behind the china cabinet? Are you sure? Tom adjusted his glasses. According to the original plans, yes. Whether it survived various renovations over the years, that's another question. These old houses, they evolve as families' needs change. I thought of Darla's words. These old houses, they have secrets. I need to check this when I get home, I said, trying to contain my excitement. Tom smiled. That's the treasure hunt part of historic restoration. Now, I've also pulled the historic paint analysis that was done during the 1978 renovation. Your grandfather was quite meticulous about documenting the work. The original color scheme was quite bold by today's standards. We spent the next 2 hours poring over documents, Tom explaining architectural features I'd overlooked, and me taking copious notes. By the time we finished, I had a much clearer vision of what the house had been, and what it could be again. The Society offers consultation services for historic restoration, Tom said as he carefully returned the materials to their folders. Pro bono for properties on the historic register, which yours qualifies for. If you're interested, I could stop by sometime and take a look at your specific challenges. That would be incredibly helpful, I said sincerely. I'm learning as I go, and it's overwhelming, to be honest. Everyone feels that way at the beginning of these projects, he assured me. But from what Claire tells me, you're not afraid of hard work. That's the most important qualification for old house ownership. He handed me his card. Call anytime. We preservationists have to stick together. I left the Historical Society with renewed determination and a car full of photocopies. The rain had finally stopped, and weak winter sunlight broke through the clouds as I drove back to Wisteria Lane. The moment I arrived home, I went straight to the dining room and examined the built-in china cabinet. It appeared to be flush against the wall, with no obvious access to anything behind it. I ran my fingers along the edges, tapping gently, listening for any hollow sound that might indicate a concealed space. Nothing seemed unusual until I noticed a small decorative rosette in the upper right corner of the cabinet's frame. Unlike its counterpart on the left side, this one protruded slightly. On a hunch, I pressed it. A soft click sounded, and the entire right side of the cabinet swung forward a few inches. My heart racing, I carefully pulled the section open wider, revealing a narrow passage that led to a small compartment about 2 feet square. Inside was a wooden box, its surface dulled by decades of dust. With trembling hands, I lifted it out and carried it to the kitchen, where the light was better. The box was crafted of dark walnut with brass hinges and a simple clasp. No lock, thankfully. I opened it slowly, holding my breath. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a collection of items that made my throat tighten with emotion. A stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, a small leather-bound journal, several photographs in cardboard frames, and beneath them, wrapped in silk, a single piece of blue willow porcelain, a small teacup, perfect and unbroken. I carefully lifted out the journal first. The inscription on the first page read, "Property of Margaret Elizabeth Hamilton, 1952. My grandmother's journal, written the year she married my grandfather and moved into this house as a young bride. Beneath it was an envelope addressed simply, "For Emma, when the house returns to you." My vision blurred with tears as I stared at my name in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. How had she known? Had she somehow anticipated that I would find my way back here, that I would discover this hidden treasure she'd left specifically for me? With shaking fingers, I opened the envelope to find a single sheet of paper, dated just 2 weeks before she and my grandfather had moved to assisted living. "My dearest Emma," it began. I sank into a chair, clutching the letter, the world around me fading as I read my grandmother's final message. A message she'd trusted to the house itself to deliver when the time was right. "My dearest Emma," the letter began in my grandmother's elegant cursive. "If you're reading this, then my heart was right about you all along. You've found your way back to Wisteria Lane, back to the home that has sheltered 5 generations of our family. Your mother never understood this house. She saw only the burden of its care, never the blessing of its history. But you, my sweet girl, you always listened when these old walls spoke." I paused, wiping away tears that blurred my vision. The kitchen around me was cold and in disrepair, but in that moment, I could almost feel my grandmother's presence, the scent of her lavender perfume, the warmth of her embrace. "When they told us we had to sell," the letter continued, "my only consolation was creating this small time capsule for you. I've left you my journal from 1952, the year Burton and I began our life here. I've included photographs they don't know exist. Your grandfather's family arriving from Scotland, the house in its prime, the garden parties we once hosted under the magnolia tree. And I've saved one piece of the blue willow collection, the teacup from which I drank each morning while watching the sunrise from the east window. They can sell the house, Emma, but they cannot sell our memories or our legacy." I carefully set down the letter and lifted the delicate teacup from its silk wrapping. The blue willow pattern was as vivid as I remembered, the porcelain thin enough that light passed through when I held it up. My grandmother had taken her morning tea from this cup for over 60 years. "I don't know when or how you'll find this," the letter went on when I returned to it. "Perhaps the house will pass to strangers for a time. Perhaps years will go by. But I've always believed that what belongs together finds its way back eventually. This house belongs with you, Emma. You belong with it. When I'm gone, remember this. There is a wealth here that cannot be counted in dollars. There is a strength in these walls built not just of wood and stone, but of faith and love and sacrifice." The final paragraph made my breath catch. "In the attic, beneath the floorboards marked with a carved star, you'll find a strongbox. The combination is your birthday, month, day, year. Inside is enough to help you restore what time has taken, should you choose that path. Consider it my investment in the future of this home, and in you, the granddaughter who always saw its worth. All my love, always. Grandma Margaret." I sat perfectly still, the letter trembling in my hands. What exactly had my grandmother hidden? In the attic? And how had my mother never found it during the week she'd spent preparing the house for sale? Setting the letter aside, I gathered the journal and photographs, carefully returning them to the walnut box. The blue willow teacup I placed on the kitchen windowsill, a small beacon of beauty amid the chaos of renovation. The attic could wait until morning. Tonight, I needed to process what I'd already discovered, not just the physical items, but the knowledge that my grandmother had believed in me so completely, had trusted me with the legacy of this house, even when my own mother never had. I picked up my phone to call Claire and share my discovery, but a text message had already come through from Tom at the Historical Society. "Hope you found something interesting. By the way, we're hosting a workshop this Saturday on historic window restoration. Thought you might be interested." I texted back quickly, "You have no idea how interesting. And yes to the workshop. Windows are next on my priority list." His response came immediately. "Great, 10 a.m. at the Society. Bring pictures of your specific windows. Also, the town's historic preservation grant applications are due next Friday. Should I drop off a form tomorrow? Your property definitely qualifies. A grant could make a significant difference in my stretched budget. That would be amazing. Thank you." I added my address, though I suspected Tom already knew it. In small towns like Millfield, the restoration of a historic property was inevitably community news. The next morning dawned clear and cold. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and a protein bar, I bundled up in layers and made my way to the narrow attic stairs. The door at the top stuck slightly, requiring a firm push before it surrendered with a groan of ancient hinges. The attic stretched the entire length of the house, its peaked ceiling following the roofline. Dust motes danced in the pale shafts of light that penetrated through small dormer windows. Unlike the rest of the house, which had been emptied before, the attic still contained scattered remnants of the past, trunks with broken latches, a dress form missing one arm, stacks of yellowed newspapers tied with twine. I moved slowly, scanning the wide plank floorboards for the carved star my grandmother had mentioned. The attic was easily 60 feet long, and in the dim light, such a small marking would be easy to miss. Near the chimney stack, a dusty canvas tarp covered what appeared to be furniture. Curious, I pulled it back to reveal my grandfather's old roll-top desk, the one that had occupied the corner of his study for as long as I could remember. I ran my hand along its scarred surface, remembering how he would lift me onto his lap as a child, letting me sort the colored paper clips into separate compartments while he worked on household accounts. Why had this piece been left behind when everything else had been sold or discarded? Had my mother simply forgotten it existed up here? Or had someone deliberately hidden it? I pulled on the brass handle, but the roll top was locked. Another mystery for another day. Right now, I needed to find that starred floorboard. It took nearly an hour of methodical searching, but I finally found it near the eastern dormer window, a small, five-pointed star carved into the wood, weathered with age but unmistakable. The board itself seemed no different from its neighbors, but when I pressed one edge, it tilted slightly. Holding my breath, I worked my fingers under the edge and lifted. The board came away easily, revealing a cavity beneath. And there, just as my grandmother had promised, sat a metal strongbox, its surface coated with a thin layer of dust. I lifted it out carefully. It was heavier than I expected, and set it on the floor beside me. The combination lock gleamed dully in the attic. Light. With slightly trembling fingers, I dialed in my birth date, or 1787. The lock clicked open on the first try. Inside lay several neatly organized items, a thick manila envelope, a small jewelry box, and beneath them, a leather portfolio tied with faded ribbon. I opened the envelope first, finding inside a collection of documents. The original deed to the house from 1923, insurance papers, and what appeared to be stock certificates, dozens of them, issued to Burton and Margaret Hamilton. My breath caught as I recognized some of the company names: IBM, Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, blue-chip stocks purchased decades ago and apparently never sold. A handwritten note in my grandfather's precise handwriting was paper-clipped to the front. For the preservation of our home, when the time comes. I set the stack aside with shaking hands and opened the small jewelry box next. It contained my grandmother's engagement ring, a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds in a platinum setting, along with a pair of pearl earrings and a delicate gold locket. Taped inside the lid was another note, this one in my grandmother's hand, for Emma, to wear or to sell, whatever serves her best. The leather portfolio held the most surprising contents of all: detailed drawings and specifications for the house, including renovation plans my grandparents had apparently commissioned, but never implemented. A vision for the next century, read the cover page. Hamilton House Restoration Proposal, 2010. They had planned to restore the house themselves, I realized. They had saved for it, prepared for it, only to have my mother convince them to sell instead. As this revelation sank in, my phone rang, startling me in the quiet attic. My mother's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something, perhaps the weight of what I'd just discovered, compelled me to answer. "Emma? Are you there?" Her voice sounded unusually tight. "I'm here, Mom. What's up?" "I've just had the most disturbing conversation with Martha Chen from the Historical Society Board. She says you're applying for a restoration grant for that house." The way she said "that house" made it sound like an embarrassing family secret. "I am," I confirmed, keeping my voice neutral. "The house qualifies for historic status, which makes it eligible for—" "Do you have any idea how this looks?" she interrupted. "The Chens and the Whitakers are on the hospital board, Emma. The same hospital where Jason is interviewing for his residency. Now they all know my daughter is living in a rundown house on the wrong side of town, playing handyman, instead of pursuing a real career." I closed my eyes, counted to 3. "I have a real career, Mom. Creative director is a significant promotion, and Wisteria Lane is experiencing a renaissance. Property values have increased 15% in just the last year. That's not the point," she snapped. "The point is appearances. The point is family reputation. The point is that Jason has worked incredibly hard to get where he is, and your eccentricities shouldn't undermine his opportunities." The familiar hot flush of anger and hurt rose in my chest. Always Jason. Always his needs, his accomplishments, his future prospects taking precedence over mine. "My career choices have nothing to do with Jason's medical residency," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "And restoring a historic family property is hardly an eccentricity. You haven't even told me where you're getting the money for all this," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Don't tell me you've cashed out your retirement accounts. Please tell me you're not that foolish." I looked down at the stock certificates in my lap, my grandparents' careful investment in a future they'd hoped for but never seen realized. "My finances are in order, Mom. I don't need to justify my decisions to you." "Well, something needs to change, and quickly," she said, her tone shifting to the brisk efficiency she used when delivering ultimatums. "Jason's interview went well, but the final selection depends on many factors. His fiancée's family has deep roots in Millfield. They have certain expectations about the life she'll lead, the social circles they'll move in. Having his half-sister living in squalor doesn't exactly fit that picture." "I'm not living in squalor," I replied, heat rising in my face despite my efforts to remain calm. "I'm restoring a piece of our family history, a home that meant everything to Grandma and Grandpa." "Oh, for heaven's sake," my mother sighed. "Not this again. That house was a money pit that nearly bankrupted them in their final years. I did them a favor by convincing them to sell." I bit back the retort that rose to my lips, the evidence I now held in my hands that contradicted her version of events. Some revelations needed the right moment, and this wasn't it. "Look," she continued in a softer tone that I recognized as her negotiating voice. "I have a solution that works for everyone. The development company Jason's future father-in-law is involved with has expressed interest in that area. They're planning an upscale townhouse complex. They could make you a very fair offer on the property, well above market value, and you could move somewhere more suitable." I've already mentioned the possibility to them. Anger flashed through me, white hot. You've what? You've discussed selling my house without even talking to me first? Don't be dramatic, Emma. I simply mentioned that you might be open to the right offer. After all, it's not as if you have any real attachment to the place. You haven't lived in Millfield since you were a child. That's not the point, I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. The point is that this is my house, my decision, and frankly, none of your business. Everything that affects this family is my business, she replied coldly. I'll have Lawrence, that's Jason's future father-in-law, call you next week with their offer. Just promise me you'll listen before you say no. For once in your life, think about someone other than yourself. The call ended before I could respond, leaving me sitting amid my grandparents' treasures, shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The irony of her final accusation was so profound, it would have been laughable if it wasn't so painful. I carefully returned the stock certificates and jewelry to the strongbox, but kept out the renovation plans. Then I replaced the strongbox in its hiding place and returned the marked floorboard to its position. My grandmother had kept these things safe for years. They could remain hidden a while longer. As I descended from the attic, the house seemed to creak and settle around me, as if it too felt the threat in my mother's words. But rather than discouragement, I felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't just about a building anymore. This was about honoring my grandparents' legacy, about claiming my rightful place in a family that had too often pushed me to the margins. And perhaps most importantly, it was about standing firm in a choice that was unquestionably mine to make. The doorbell rang just as I reached the bottom of the stairs. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could make out Tom's tall figure on the porch, grant application in hand. Perfect timing. If my mother wanted a fight, she would find. I was far better prepared than she imagined. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Tom said when I opened the door. His eyes narrowed with concern behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Everything okay?" I managed a smile. "Not a ghost, just family drama. Come in. I have some renovation plans. I'd love your opinion on..." He followed me to the kitchen, where I'd spread out the portfolio from the attic. "These are incredible," he said, leaning over the detailed drawings. "Original Somerset hallmarks, but updated with modern systems. Where did you find these?" "Family archive," I said, not quite a lie. "My grandparents commissioned them years ago, but never got to implement them." Tom nodded appreciatively, tracing a finger along the elevation drawing of the facade. "This is exactly the kind of documented plan the Grants Committee loves to see. Mind if I take photos to include with your application? This could significantly improve your chances." "Please do," I agreed. "And Tom, how much do you know about historic designation for private homes? The kind that would prevent demolition or major alteration, even if the property changed hands?" He glanced up, curiosity evident in his expression. Quite a bit, actually. It's a passion of mine." He straightened, adjusting his glasses. "Are you concerned about future development pressure? Let's just say I want to ensure this house remains standing for another 100 years, regardless of who owns it." Tom nodded slowly. "I understand. The Historical Society can help with that process too. It's more involved than the grant application, but the protection it provides is substantial." He hesitated. "Is there something specific prompting this? Development plans I should know about?" I considered how much to share, then decided on a simplified version of the truth. "My mother believes this house would better serve the community. As the site of luxury townhomes, I disagree." "Ah," Tom said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Family disagreements about historic properties are, unfortunately, common. But as the legal owner, you have options." He pulled out his phone. Let me email you the preliminary historic designation forms today. The sooner we start that process, the better protected you'll be." After Tom left with photos of the renovation plans and promises of expedited paperwork, I found myself drawn to my grandmother's journal. Settling onto the air mattress with a fresh cup of coffee in the blue willow teacup, I opened the leather-bound book to its first entry. April 17th, 1952. Today I became Mrs. Burton Hamilton, and tonight I sleep for the first time in our new home on Wisteria Lane. Burton calls it our grand old lady, though his mother sniffs that it's outdated and impractical. Perhaps it is, by modern standards. But when I walk these halls, I feel the presence of the generations who came before. Their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and struggles. Burton's great-grandfather built a legacy here, and now it falls to us to honor it. I traced my finger over the words, imagining my grandmother as a young bride, full of hope and determination. The parallels to my own situation weren't lost on me. The journal continued, chronicling the early years of their marriage, the challenges of maintaining a large historic home, the gradual updates they'd made while preserving its character. But what struck me most were the recurring references to my mother, Elena, born in 1954. Elena shows little interest in the house's history. One entry from 1964 read, "At 10 years old, she's already asking when we can move to a normal house, like her friends have. Burton tells me not to worry, that she'll appreciate our heritage when she's older. I'm not so certain." There's something in her expression when she looks around, not quite disdain, but a kind of impatience, as if the past is merely an inconvenience to be overcome. I paused, recognizing that same impatience in the way my mother had spoken to me just an hour ago. The house had never been home to her. It had been an obligation, a burden, perhaps even an embarrassment compared to the newer, more fashionable homes of her peers. September 9th, 1972. Another entry read, "Elena left for college today. I worry she'll never truly return to us. Not in the ways that matter. She looks toward a future so different from anything Burton and I understand. A world of corporate ladders and city apartments and achievements measured in dollars. She sees our life here as provincial, our attachment to this house as sentimental foolishness. Perhaps it is. But what is life without sentiment, without roots? What is success if it requires discarding the very foundations that shaped you?" I closed the journal, unable to read more. The ache in my grandmother's words was too familiar, too raw. She had recognized in her daughter the same dismissal I'd experienced throughout my life, the sense that my values, my choices, my perspective somehow missed the mark of what truly mattered. Outside, the February afternoon was fading into early evening, shadows lengthening across the yard. On impulse, I bundled up in my coat and boots and stepped onto the back porch. The garden was dormant now, but I could imagine it as it appeared in the photos I'd found, lush with hydrangeas and roses, the magnolia tree in full bloom, garden parties with tables set with the blue willow china. My grandfather's ship bell still hung on its bracket by the porch steps, tarnished but intact. On a whim, I reached out and pulled the small rope that hung beside it. The bell rang out, clear and bright in the winter stillness, its sound carrying across the garden and echoing back from the old carriage house at the property's edge. "Ring it at sunset," my grandmother had written in her journal. Burton says it welcomes the evening and bids farewell to the day's troubles. As if in answer to this thought, my phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number, but the message made the sender's identity clear. "Emma, this is Lawrence Blackwell, Jason's fiancé, Melissa's father. Your mother suggested I reach out regarding a potential offer for your property on Wisteria Lane. My development group, Millfield Luxury Homes, is prepared to make a very generous proposal. When would be a convenient time to discuss?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. The bell's resonance had faded, but its purpose remained: to mark transitions, to honor traditions, to connect past with present. My mother had set her plan in motion more quickly than I'd anticipated. But what she didn't realize, what she had perhaps never understood, was that this house wasn't simply property to be acquired and discarded. It was a trust, a responsibility, a connection to something larger than myself. And thanks to my grandparents' foresight, I now had the resources to protect it. I rang the bell once more, its clear tone cutting through the gathering dusk. Then I turned and went back inside, closing the door firmly behind me on the deepening shadows. The next morning brought a steady rain that drummed against the roof and streamed down the windows in rivulets. I woke early, my mind already racing, with plans. The stock certificates I'd found represented significant value, enough, potentially, to fund the entire restoration without depleting my savings or relying solely on grants. I called my financial advisor as soon as the markets opened. "Emma, good to hear from you," Marcus said warmly. "How's the house project coming along?" "It's getting more interesting by the day," I replied. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I've come into possession of some stock certificates that belong to my grandparents. I need advice on how to verify their value and possibly liquidate some of them." "As stock certificates? Actual paper ones?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "That's increasingly rare these days. How old are we talking?" "Most appear to be from the 1950s and 60s, I said, glancing at the dates. "Blue chip companies?" "Primarily." There was a low whistle from Marcus. "Potentially very valuable, especially if dividends were reinvested over the decades. I'll need to see them to confirm authenticity and track any splits or reorganizations. Can you bring them in?" We arranged a meeting for later that afternoon. After hanging up, I carefully photographed each certificate, created a detailed inventory, and then returned them to the strongbox in the attic. Only then did I allow myself to address the text from Lawrence Blackwell. "Mr. Blackwell," I typed, "thank you for your interest in my home. However, I should clarify that the property is not for sale at any price. Additionally, I'm in the process of applying for historic designation, which will permanently protect the structure from demolition or significant alteration. I appreciate your understanding in this matter." I hesitated only briefly before pressing send. The response came almost immediately. "I understand your attachment to the property, but I hope you'll at least hear our offer before making a final decision. Historic designation can be a lengthy process with uncertain outcomes. Perhaps we could meet for coffee this week to discuss options that might satisfy both our interests." His persistence didn't surprise me. Developers were accustomed to initial resistance from property owners, especially when family homes were involved. What likely did surprise him was my firm second refusal. "My decision is final. The house is not for sale, and any further discussions would waste both our time. Good day." I blocked his number immediately afterward, a small act of self-protection that felt unexpectedly liberating. Then I turned my attention to more pressing concerns, specifically the leaking roof that had created new water stains on the second-floor ceiling overnight. The rain continued throughout the morning as I worked remotely, attending virtual meetings and approving design comps for an advertising campaign. Around noon, as I was heating soup on the camp stove I'd set up in the kitchen, a car pulled into the driveway, a sleek black Mercedes that I recognized immediately as my mother's. I watched through the window as she emerged, an umbrella unfurling above her perfectly coiffed hair. She wore a tailored camel coat and high-heeled boots entirely impractical for the muddy yard. Even from a distance, the set of her shoulders telegraphed determination. Taking a deep breath, I moved to open the front door before she could ring the bell. "Mom," I said neutrally as she climbed the porch steps. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" she replied, closing her umbrella with a practiced flick. "You've ignored Lawrence's generous approach and blocked his number. Did you really think that would be the end of it?" I stepped back to allow her inside, noting how her gaze darted critically around the foyer, cataloging every imperfection. I made my position clear. The house isn't for sale. She removed her gloves one finger at a time, tucking them into her coat pocket. Emma, be reasonable. Lawrence is prepared to offer $300,000. That's nearly 4 times what you paid for a property that requires hundreds of thousands in repairs. I'm aware of what the house needs, I said, leading her into the living room where at least the furniture I'd ordered had been delivered. A comfortable sofa and armchair that looked oddly modern against the Victorian backdrop. I'm also aware of what it's worth, both financially and historically. My mother remained standing, either unwilling to commit to a longer conversation or reluctant to sit on furniture that might soil her immaculate clothing. This isn't about history, Emma. It's about practicality. This neighborhood is changing. The land beneath this house is worth far more than the structure itself. To developers, perhaps, I agreed. But not to me. She sighed, exasperation evident in every line of her face. You always were stubborn, just like my mother. She clung to this house long after it made sense to leave, draining their retirement funds for constant repairs. I won't stand by and watch you make the same mistake. The lie, so casually delivered, so contrary to the evidence I'd uncovered, might have gone unchallenged a week ago. But now I knew better. That's not true, I said quietly. Grandma and Grandpa weren't draining their resources. They were saving, planning. They had a vision for this house's restoration that you either didn't know about or chose to ignore. Her expression shifted slightly, surprise, quickly masked. What are you talking about? I found their renovation plans and their investments, stocks they'd set aside specifically to fund the work. They never wanted to sell this house. Mom. They were forced to leave because of health issues, but they always intended for it to stay in the family. Color rose in her cheeks. That's absurd. If such investments existed, they would have been included in the estate. They were hidden, I said simply. Grandma left them for me to find. Hidden, she repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. Are you suggesting my mother deliberately concealed assets during the estate settlement? That would be fraud, Emma. I shrugged. Or it could be that some things were simply overlooked in the rush to liquidate everything. Either way, I have resources you don't know about. Resources specifically intended for this house's preservation. We stood facing each other across the room, the rain drumming steadily on the roof above us, the air between us charged with decades of misunderstanding. Even if what you're saying is true, she said finally, it doesn't change the fact that this renovation is impractical. You're a single woman with a demanding career. This house needs a family to justify its size, its expense. I am family, I said firmly, and whether I remain single or eventually share this house with someone else is entirely my decision. Not yours, not Jason's, not his future father-in-law's. My mother's eyes narrowed. Lawrence's development plans would transform this entire block, raising property values throughout the neighborhood. Your stubbornness isn't just affecting yourself, it's holding back progress for everyone. Interesting perspective, I replied. But as I've already informed Mr. Blackwell, I'm applying for historic designation for this property. Once approved, it will be permanently protected from exactly the kind of progress you're describing. She took a step back, genuine shock registering on her face. You can't be serious. Do you have any idea how that will impact Jason's relationship with Melissa's family? They've invested significantly in this development project. Jason's relationship issues aren't my concern, I said, surprised by how easily the words came. And for the record, this house doesn't need your definition of family to justify its existence. It has survived for over a century and will continue to do so, with or without your approval. This is exactly why you've always been so difficult, she said, her voice rising slightly. You've never understood how families work, the compromises required, the considerations beyond your own immediate desires. I understand perfectly, I countered. I understand that in your version of family, my needs and wishes have always been secondary. I understand that Jason's convenience has always outweighed my happiness. I understand that this house that Grandma and Grandpa loved, that was meant to stay in our family, was sold out from under them because it didn't fit your vision of progress. That's not fair, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? You've spent my entire life making it clear that I'm somehow less important, less worthy of consideration, less central to your definition of family. Well, this house is only for real family, Mom. Your words, not mine. And I finally realized that in your eyes, I never qualified. She flinched as though I'd struck her. I never said that. You didn't have to, I replied, suddenly weary of the conversation, of the familiar patterns we seemed destined to repeat. Your actions have always spoken clearly enough. For a moment, she looked genuinely lost, as if the script she'd prepared had been snatched away, leaving her without lines. Then her expression hardened again, the familiar mask of control sliding back into place. You've made your position clear, she said stiffly. I'll inform Lawrence that negotiations are futile, but don't come looking for support when this place becomes more than you can handle. This decision of yours has consequences, Emma. I'm well aware, I said, walking toward the front door to signal the conversation's end. I've been living with the consequences of other people's decisions my entire life. It's about time I created some of my own. She brushed past me without another word, her umbrella snapping open as she stepped onto the porch. I watched her retreat to her car, back rigid with displeasure, and felt not regret, but relief. The confrontation I'd dreaded for so long had finally occurred, and I was still standing. As her Mercedes disappeared down Wisteria Lane, I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the rain and the creaking response of the old house settling around me. For the first time since I'd taken possession of the keys, the emptiness didn't feel lonely. It felt like possibility, like potential, like home. The ship's bell chimed softly in the breeze on the back porch, not the full ring activated by the pull rope, but a gentler sound, as if responding to some private current of air. I smiled, imagining my grandmother's approval echoing through the rooms she'd once loved. This house had weathered storms far worse than my mother's disapproval. Together, we would weather this one too. The following week passed in a blur of activity. My meeting with Marcus, the financial advisor, confirmed what I'd suspected. The stock certificates represented a small fortune. Decades of compound growth and reinvested dividends had transformed my grandparents' careful investments into a substantial nest egg. Conservatively, we're looking at just over $800,000, Marcus said, looking up from his calculations. And that's not counting the IBM shares, which would add another $150,000 or so. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. The figure was far beyond what I'd imagined. Your grandparents were quite savvy investors, he continued, shuffling through the papers. They bought into these companies early and held on through thick and thin. Classic buy-and-hold strategy that paid off beautifully. They were saving for the house, I said softly, more to myself than to Marcus. All those years they were preparing for its restoration. Marcus nodded. Based on the notes you showed me, that seems to be the case. The question now is how you want to proceed. We could liquidate everything at once, or set up a systematic withdrawal plan to fund the renovation in stages. By the time I left his office, we had established a clear financial strategy that would allow me to restore the house properly, without cutting corners or exhausting my personal savings. The knowledge was liberating. I could now make decisions based on what was best for the property, not what I could afford in the moment. Tom from the Historical Society was equally supportive when I called to update him on my mother's visit and the pressure from the developer. Unfortunately, this is a common scenario with historic properties, he said, his tone sympathetic, but unsurprised. Developers see land value, not historical or architectural significance. But the good news is that the designation process is already underway. The committee reviews applications monthly, and I've pushed yours to the top of the stack. How long until it's official? I asked, thinking of Lawrence Blackwell and his persistent interest. Typically 3 to 6 months for full designation, Tom replied. But once the application is submitted, which yours now is, there's a preservation order that prevents major alterations or demolition while the review is pending. It's essentially immediate protection, even if the final designation takes longer. That evening, I sat at my grandfather's roll-top desk, which I'd moved from the attic to the study. The lock had yielded to gentle persuasion from a hairpin, revealing neat compartments filled with fountain pens, stationery, and a small leather address book. I'd cleared the surface and spread out the original Somerset architectural plans alongside my grandparents' renovation proposals from 2010. The two sets of documents, separated by more than a century, shared a common reverence for the house's character while acknowledging the need for modern functionality. I began sketching my own vision, a synthesis of past and present that honored the home's history while preparing it for its future. As spring began to whisper through Millfield, the house gradually awakened from its long dormancy. The plumbing system was completely overhauled, the electricity updated to modern standards, and the roof repaired before the March rains could cause further damage. I focused on structural necessities first, aware that cosmetic improvements would be meaningless if the foundation wasn't sound. Claire stopped by regularly, bringing homemade meals and moral support. "This place is already looking 100% better," she declared one evening as we shared pizza on the porch swing I'd restored. "You can feel the difference in the energy. It doesn't feel abandoned anymore." "It feels alive again," I agreed, looking out over the front garden where early crocuses were pushing through the soil. "Like it's breathing easier." She nodded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "So, any more visits from your mother or the developer goon squad?" "Radio silence from both," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Though Jason sent a text last week saying he's accepted the residency at Millfield General. They're looking at rental properties on the north side of town." "Ah, the fancy side," Claire observed with a knowing smile. "Far away from your embarrassing historical treasure." I laughed, but the humor was tinged with old pain. He did mention they might stop by to see the renovation progress. That's new at least, an actual acknowledgement that I'm not just camping in a condemned building. "Progress," Claire agreed. "Small, but progress." Tom Whitaker proved to be an invaluable ally as the renovation continued. He introduced me to specialized craftspeople, a stained glass restorer for the damaged parlor window, a plasterer who specialized in Victorian ceiling medallions, a carpenter who could replicate the intricate porch spindles that had rotted beyond repair. He also became a regular visitor, often stopping by after work to check on progress or share a new historical tidbit he'd uncovered about the house. Our professional relationship gradually warmed into friendship, his enthusiasm for architectural preservation matching my growing passion for the project. "I found something you might be interested in," he said one April evening, carefully extracting a large envelope from his messenger bag. The Historical Society was cataloging a recently donated collection from the Prescott family, the original builders of your house, and I came across these. He withdrew several sepia-toned photographs showing the house in its earliest days, including one remarkable image of the original garden design. "I thought these might help with your landscaping plans," he explained, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. The formal rose garden was apparently quite famous locally. I studied the photos with delight, noting details that had long since disappeared. An ornate fountain where now only a concrete base remained, espaliered fruit trees along the south wall, a charming gazebo nestled among flowering shrubs. Tom, these are incredible, I said, looking up to find him watching me with an intensity that momentarily caught me off guard. Thank you for thinking of me. Of course, he replied, adjusting his glasses in a gesture I'd come to recognize as a nervous habit. I'm glad they're helpful. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I was thinking, the Botanical Garden is hosting a special exhibition on Victorian landscape design next weekend. It might provide some inspiration for your garden restoration. Would you be interested in going? Together, I mean? The invitation hung in the air between us, clearly extending beyond professional courtesy into personal territory. I found myself smiling, surprised by how welcome the prospect felt. I'd like that, I said simply. He exhaled, relief evident in his posture. Great. It's a date then. After he left, I remained on the porch, watching twilight settle over the awakening garden. The house felt different somehow, not just because of the physical improvements, but because it was gradually becoming a place of new connections, new possibilities. My grandmother's journal entries often spoke of the house as a living entity, responsive to the emotions and intentions of its inhabitants. For the first time, I truly understood what she meant. The following Saturday morning, I was in the garden, clearing winter debris from what I now knew had once been a formal rose bed, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows, it had the unmistakable look of wealth and corporate authority. I straightened, pushing back my gardening hat as Lawrence Blackwell himself emerged from the driver's side. He was exactly as I'd imagined. From my mother's descriptions, silver-haired, expensively dressed in casual weekend attire that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, his smile practiced and confident. "Ms. Taylor," he called as he approached, negotiating the garden path with careful steps. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I was driving through the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." "Mr. Blackwell," I acknowledged, making no move to remove my soil-covered gloves or offer a handshake. "This is a surprise, especially since I was quite clear in our text exchange." His smile didn't falter. "I find that sometimes direct conversation can overcome misunderstandings that arise through digital communication." "May I?" He gestured toward the house. I hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Better to have this conversation once and definitively, then allow him to continue thinking there was room for negotiation. As we walked toward the porch, I noticed him taking in the visible improvements. The repaired roof, the fresh paint on the trim, the new period-appropriate light fixtures flanking the front door. "You've been busy," he observed, his tone suggesting surprise. "The property looks quite different from when I last drove by." "That's generally the point of renovation," I replied dryly, leading him into the front parlor where new wallpaper in a historically accurate pattern now adorned the walls. The original fireplace had been carefully restored, its marble surround gleaming after professional cleaning. Lawrence took a seat in one of the antique chairs I'd found at a local estate sale, looking incongruously modern against the Victorian backdrop. "I'll be direct, Ms. Taylor. My partners and I are prepared to offer $500,000 for this property. That's nearly 7 times what you paid, and well above current market value, even with the improvements you've made." I remained standing, arms crossed. "The house isn't for sale, Mr. Blackwell. Not for $500,000, not for $1 million. I've initiated historic designation proceedings, which will prevent demolition or significant alteration regardless of ownership. Your development plans for this property are simply not viable." He leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of paternal concern. "Emma, may I call you Emma? I understand your sentimental attachment to this house. Your mother explained your childhood connection to the property, but sentiment doesn't pay bills, and historical designation is a double-edged sword. It limits what can be done with the property, yes, but it also imposes significant restrictions and expenses on the owner. I'm well aware of the responsibilities that come with historic designation," I replied. "I've done my research, Mr. Blackwell. I'm fully prepared for both the privileges and obligations it entails." He sighed, a calculated gesture of regret. "Your mother mentioned you could be determined, but I wonder if you've considered the broader implications. Our development would create housing for at least 12 families, generate significant tax revenue for Millfield, and substantially increase neighboring property values. One might argue there's a certain selfishness in preserving a single-family dwelling of this size when the community could benefit from thoughtful redevelopment." The attempt to reframe my preservation efforts as self-centered struck a nerve, as he'd no doubt intended. But I'd spent too many years being manipulated by similar tactics from my mother to be swayed now. "Interesting perspective," I said, keeping my voice level. "But historic preservation serves the community too, maintaining architectural diversity, honoring cultural heritage, preventing the homogenization of neighborhoods under the guise of progress. This house has stood for over a century, Mr. Blackwell. It deserves better than being raised for luxury townhomes that will be outdated in 20 years. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see your mind is made up. That's unfortunate. Jason and Melissa were particularly excited about the location. They had hoped to take the corner unit, with views of the park. And there it was, the real reason for his persistence. The family connection he was counting on to sway me. My half-brother and his fiancée had apparently been promised prime real estate in the development that would replace my home. Jason has never shown any interest in this house or this neighborhood before now," I observed. "His sudden enthusiasm for the location seems conveniently timed with your development plans." Lawrence shrugged, abandoning pretense. "Business and family often align productively. Your brother, half-brother," I corrected automatically. "Half-brother," he amended smoothly, "is marrying my daughter. That makes us family, in a sense. I had hoped we might find a mutually beneficial arrangement." "The only arrangement I'm interested in is being left alone to restore this house as my grandparents intended," I said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have gardening to finish before my afternoon appointment." He rose, straightening his expensive casual jacket. "This isn't the end of the conversation, Emma. Development is inevitable in growing communities like Millfield. Fighting it only delays the inevitable while creating unnecessary conflict. I hope you'll reconsider." I escorted him to the door, maintaining a polite but unmistakable distance. "My decision is final, Mr. Blackwell. Please respect it." As his SUV pulled away, I noticed Tom's modest sedan approaching from the opposite direction. The contrast between the two men, one representing corporate development pressure, the other historic preservation, couldn't have been more stark. Tom stepped out, casting a curious glance at the departing vehicle. "Everything okay?" That looked like Lawrence Blackwell. "It was," I confirmed, brushing garden soil from my jeans, making one last attempt to buy the house for his townhome development. Tom's expression darkened. His development company has been purchasing properties throughout the older neighborhoods. 3 historic homes have been demolished in the past year alone, despite our protests. "Well, he won't be adding this one to his tally," I said firmly. I made that abundantly clear. Tom's smile returned, warm with admiration. "You're a preservationist hero, Emma Taylor." He held up a manila envelope. "And as a reward for your valiant stand against the forces of generic luxury housing, I bring good news. The preliminary approval for your historic designation came through yesterday. It's not final yet, but it's a significant step. The property is now officially protected pending full review." Joy surged through me as I accepted the envelope. "Tom, that's wonderful. Thank you for expediting everything." "Don't thank me. Thank your grandmother for building such a compelling case through her documentation over the years. The committee was particularly impressed with the original architectural elements you've preserved." He checked his watch. "Ready for our botanical garden excursion? We can celebrate your preliminary designation while we're at it." The afternoon at the botanical garden was a welcome respite from renovation stress and family drama. Tom proved to be knowledgeable, an engaging company, his passion for historical preservation extending to landscape design. We wandered through exhibits of Victorian garden plans, stopping frequently to discuss how certain elements might be adapted for my property. The Victorians were obsessed with meaning, Tom explained as we examined a display of heritage roses. Every flower, every plant arrangement conveyed specific messages. It was practically a secret language. My grandmother mentioned that in her journal, I recalled. She wrote about planting yellow roses by the kitchen door because they symbolized friendship and welcome. Tom nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And did you know the original Prescott Garden was actually featured in a gardening journal from 1890? The Society has a copy in the archives. The article praised its innovative combination of formal English design with more naturalistic American elements. As the day progressed, our conversation shifted from professional to personal. I learned that Tom had grown up in Millfield, left for college and a brief career in architectural preservation in Boston, then returned when his father became ill. He'd stayed after his father's passing, finding unexpected fulfillment in documenting and preserving his hometown's architectural heritage. Sometimes the place you're meant to be is right where you started, he said as we shared coffee on the garden's terrace. Just seen through new eyes. The observation resonated deeply. Wasn't that exactly my experience with my grandparents' house? A return to origins, but with fresh perspective and purpose. By the time Tom dropped me home in the early evening, something had shifted between us. A comfortable warmth that promised possibilities beyond professional collaboration. Standing on the porch steps, he hesitated before leaving. I had a really good time today, he said, his usual confidence momentarily replaced by endearing uncertainty. So did I replied, meaning it completely. Maybe we could do it again? Dinner next weekend, perhaps? There's a new farm-to-table restaurant downtown that's supposed to be excellent. I smiled, surprising myself with how natural it felt. I'd like that very much. He beamed, then leaned forward and kissed my cheek lightly before heading back to his car. I watched him drive away, a pleasant warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. Inside, the house seemed to welcome me back, its familiar creaks and settling sounds now comforting rather than concerning. I changed out of my garden clothes and curled up in the window seat of the study with my grandmother's journal, opening to a passage I'd marked earlier. May 18, 1953. Burton surprised me today with the garden bench I've been admiring in the Sears catalog. We placed it beneath the magnolia tree and spent the evening watching fireflies emerge as dusk settled. He says the house chose us as much as we chose it. I laughed at the notion, but there's something in it that rings true. This old house has a way of finding the people who will love it properly. The words settled around me like a benediction. The house had found me, had waited for me, had kept its secrets safe until I was ready to receive them. And now it was introducing me to new possibilities, with Tom, with the community, with a future I couldn't have imagined when I first drove up to the sagging porch just a few months ago. May arrived with an explosion of color in the garden. The roses I'd carefully pruned and fertilized were budding, and the azaleas burst into brilliant pink and white blooms along the property's edge. Inside, the house was gradually transforming too. The kitchen now boasted period-appropriate cabinets with modern innards. The bathrooms gleamed with restored clawfoot tubs and hexagonal tile floors, and the original hardwood floors had been refinished to a warm, honey glow throughout the first floor. I was reviewing paint samples for the dining room when my phone rang with Jason's number, an unusual occurrence that immediately caught my attention. Jason, everything okay? Hey, he replied, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. Got a minute to talk? Of course, what's going on? He exhaled heavily. It's about the house. Lawrence, Melissa's dad, he's been pressuring me to convince you to sell. Says it would be a show of family unity if I could bring you around. I sank into a chair, paint samples forgotten. I'm not surprised he's trying that angle, but I am surprised you're telling me about it. Yeah, well, he paused, clearly uncomfortable. The thing is, I visited the neighborhood yesterday. Just drove around, getting a feel for where we might be living during my residency. And I saw your place. I waited, unsure where this was heading. It looks amazing, Emma, he continued, genuine admiration warming his tone. You've done incredible work. It's starting to look the way I remember it from when we were kids, but better. Thank you, I said, touched by the unexpected praise. That means a lot. The thing is, he continued, seeing it like that, seeing what you've accomplished, it made me realize I can't be part of trying to tear it down. Lawrence showed me the development plans. Those townhomes would erase every trace of what that house was, of what it meant to Grandma and Grandpa. My throat tightened with emotion. I didn't think you remembered much about them or the house. I remember more than you might think, he said softly. Grandpa teaching me chess in the study, Grandma letting me help bake cookies in that huge old kitchen. I was younger than you, so my memories are probably hazier, but they're still important. To me. It was perhaps the longest, most personal conversation we'd had in years, possibly ever. The careful distance maintained between us, partly by our significant age gap and partly by our mother's subtle reinforcement of separate spheres, had rarely allowed for such direct connection. So what happens now? I asked. Are you telling Lawrence, you won't help pressure me? I already did, Jason admitted, a hint of defiance in his voice. It didn't go over well. He implied there might be complications with my residency position if the development falls through. Nothing direct, just hints. Anger flared in my chest. That's completely unethical. He can't threaten your medical career over a real estate deal. Probably not directly, Jason agreed, but he has influence at the hospital. Donors have pull, even if it's unofficial. What about Melissa? Where does she stand in all this? He sighed again. Caught in the middle. She loves her dad, but she's also not comfortable with how he's handling this. Actually, she's the one who suggested I call you. She thinks we should all sit down together, you, me, her, maybe Mom, and talk about what this house really means. To our family, try to help her dad understand why it matters. The suggestion caught me off guard. Not just the proposed meeting, but the implication that Jason and Melissa saw value in preservation over development, tradition over profit. It was so contrary to my mother's influence that I hardly knew how to respond. You'd really do that? I asked. Stand with me against Lawrence's development plans? It's the right thing to do, he said simply. And look, Em, I know things haven't always been equal between us. The way Mom treated us, the opportunities I got that you didn't. I didn't create that situation, but I benefited from it, and I never really acknowledged that before. I'm sorry. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. Thank you for saying that, Jason. It means more than you know. So, about that meeting, Melissa suggested Sunday afternoon if that works for you. We could come to the house, see the restoration progress in person. Melissa's actually really interested in what you've done. She studied art history before switching to nursing. Sunday works, I agreed, still processing this unexpected alliance. But I'm not sure Mom will come if she knows the purpose is to oppose Lawrence's development. Leave Mom to me, Jason said with newfound determination. It's time she heard some hard truths about family loyalty that goes both ways. After we hung up, I sat motionless, absorbing the seismic shift that had just occurred in our family dynamic. For the first time in my memory, Jason had explicitly chosen to stand with me rather than follow the path of least resistance our mother had always laid out for him. I wandered through the house, touching door frames and window sills as if to ground myself in their solidity. In the dining room, I paused before the china cabinet, now restored to its original luster, the hidden compartment our little secret. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice from her journal pages. This house has a way of bringing truth to the surface, of revealing what matters most. Sunday arrived with perfect spring weather, azure skies, gentle breezes, and the garden in full, glorious bloom. I spent the morning preparing, not just cleaning and staging the house to showcase the restoration progress, but also baking my grandmother's lemon pound cake from the recipe in her journal. The familiar scent filled the kitchen, creating an atmosphere of welcome I hoped would set the tone for the difficult conversation ahead. Tom had stopped by the previous day, helping me install the period-appropriate dining room chandelier I'd found at an architectural salvage shop. When I told him about the planned family summit, he'd offered moral support without inserting himself into what was clearly a private family matter, another quality I was coming to appreciate deeply about him. At precisely 2 o'clock, a car pulled into the driveway. To my surprise, it wasn't Jason's practical sedan, but my mother's Mercedes. She emerged alone, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the transformed exterior of the house. I met her at the front door, bracing for criticism or conflict. Instead, she handed me a small, tissue-wrapped bundle. "These belong to your grandmother," she said without preamble. "I found them while cleaning out my storage unit last week. I thought they should be here." Unwrapping the tissue, I discovered 3 small blue willow dessert plates, part of the collection I'd thought entirely lost to the estate sale. The gesture, though small, seemed monumental coming from my mother. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "They're perfect for the cake I baked, Grandma's lemon pound cake." Something flickered across her face, recognition perhaps, or a flash of memory. "She made that every Sunday in the summer," she said quietly. "Served it on the porch with iced tea in those ridiculous tall glasses with the painted flowers." "I have those glasses," I replied, surprised by this shared recollection. "I found a set at the antique mall in town. They're not the exact ones, but they're similar." We stood awkwardly for a moment, the small connection hovering between us like a fragile soap bubble. "You've done good work here," she finally said, glancing around the foyer with its restored staircase and refurbished hardwood floors. "It's starting to look the way I remember it from when I was very young." The admission stunned me. It was possibly the first time she'd ever acknowledged the house had once held positive associations for her. "Would you like a tour?" I offered, cautiously. "There's still plenty to do, but the major structural work is complete." She nodded, following me through the rooms with attentive silence, occasionally pausing to touch a restored molding or examine a refurbished light fixture. In the study, she stopped before my grandfather's roll-top desk. "Dad's desk," she murmured. "I thought it was sold with everything else." "It was in the attic," I explained. "I restored it myself." She ran her fingers lightly over the polished surface. "He used to let me sort his paper clips by color when I was little, before." She trailed off, but I understood what remained unspoken. Before their relationship became strained, before her rejection of the house and all it represented created a rift between them. "Jason mentioned a meeting," she said suddenly, turning to face me directly. "He says Lawrence has been putting inappropriate pressure on him regarding your refusal to sell." "That's right," I confirmed. "Lawrence seems to think family connections can be leveraged for business advantage." Her mouth tightened. "Yes, well, Lawrence is used to getting his way through influence and implication. It's how he's built his business empire." "And you're okay with him threatening Jason's residency?" I asked, watching her carefully. She straightened, indignation flashing in her eyes. Of course not. Jason's career is not a bargaining chip in Lawrence's development. Schemes. She hesitated, then added, "Neither is your home." The word choice, your home, rather than that house or the property, was not lost on me. Something had shifted in her perspective, however slightly. "So, you're not here to convince me to sell?" I asked, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. She sighed, suddenly looking tired. "I'm here because Jason made me realize that I've been prioritizing connection to Lawrence's family over loyalty to my own. That's not a comfortable recognition." Before I could respond to this unprecedented admission, the doorbell rang, announcing Jason and Melissa's arrival. I excused myself to answer it, mind whirling with the implications of my mother's words. Jason greeted me with an unexpected hug, while Melissa, a petite brunette with intelligent eyes and a warm smile, offered a bouquet of spring flowers. "Your home is absolutely gorgeous," she enthused, taking in the restored entryway. "Dad totally undersold how much character and history this place has." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by her enthusiasm. "And thank you both for suggesting this conversation. I know it's not an easy position for either of you." "Easier than watching my father bulldoze a piece of architectural history that clearly means so much to your family," Melissa said, with surprising firmness. "I've been trying to make him understand the value of preservation for years, but profit margins always seem to win out." As we moved into the dining room where I'd set out tea and cake on my grandmother's newly recovered plates, I realized that for the first time, the house was hosting exactly what it had been designed for: a family gathering, complicated and imperfect though it might be. My mother's eyes widened at the sight of the familiar dishes. "You served the cake on Mother's plates," she observed softly. "It seemed fitting," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "A way of honoring traditions while creating new ones." She nodded, a curious vulnerability in her expression that I'd rarely witnessed. "She would have liked that," she said simply. As we settled around the table, sunlight streaming through the restored stained glass panel above the bay window, I felt a profound sense of rightness, as if the house itself was facilitating the reconciliation its walls had long awaited. Whatever the outcome of our conversation, this moment of connection was itself a victory, a step toward healing old wounds and forging new understandings. The house on Wisteria Lane had always been more than just a structure of wood and stone. It was a repository of memories, a keeper of secrets, a bridge between past and future. And now, as we prepared to face Lawrence's development pressure as a unified family front, it was becoming something my grandmother had always intended it to be: a true home where real family could gather, disagree, grow, and ultimately belong. That Sunday afternoon, gathering around my grandmother's cake marked a turning point, though I couldn't have predicted exactly how significant it would prove to be. Melissa revealed herself to be an unexpected ally, articulate and passionate about preserving Millfield's architectural heritage. As the daughter of a developer, she had grown up surrounded by conversations about property values and investment potential. But her art history background had given her a deep appreciation for historical significance that her father lacked. "Dad sees buildings as assets," she explained as we toured the garden, where the magnolia tree was just beginning to unfurl its creamy blossoms. "He calculates square footage and return on investment. He doesn't understand that some places have value that can't be quantified on a spreadsheet." "That's exactly it," I agreed, grateful for her insight. "This house represents something beyond its market price: continuity, legacy, a physical connection to generations past." My mother, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet throughout much of the afternoon, joined us by the restored garden bench. "Your grandfather proposed to your grandmother on this bench," she said unexpectedly. "Did you know that?" I shook my head, surprised both by the information and by her offering it. It was the summer of 1951, she continued, running her fingers along the weathered wood slats. The magnolia was in full bloom, just like it will be in another week or so. Mother told me she dropped the ring in the grass, and they spent an hour searching for it by moonlight. A faint smile touched her lips at the memory. They found it nestled in a clover patch. She always said it was the house giving its blessing to their union. Jason exchanged a glance with me, clearly as startled as I was by this sentimental revelation from our pragmatic mother. "You never told us that story," he said gently. She shrugged, a defensive gesture that looked suddenly vulnerable rather than dismissive. "There are many things I never shared. It was easier to focus on the practical aspects of life, the forward momentum. Your father," she glanced at me, "and your stepfather," with a nod to Jason, "both valued progress over preservation. I suppose I adopted their perspective over time." It was perhaps the closest she had ever come to acknowledging how her marriages had shaped her worldview, and by extension, our family dynamics. "But you have memories of this place," I pressed carefully. "Good memories, from the sound of it." "Yes," she admitted quietly, "though I spent many years convincing myself they weren't important. That's the thing about memories. They're less insistent than mortgage payments and repair bills. At least until suddenly they're not." As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, we gathered in the newly renovated kitchen to strategize. Lawrence was hosting a community presentation the following Thursday to unveil his development plans for what he was calling Wisteria Commons. The timing wasn't coincidental. He clearly hoped to generate public support and create momentum before my historic designation could be finalized. He's invited the mayor, the Chamber of Commerce, and several prominent business owners, Melissa explained, her expression troubled. He's framing it as revitalization and community investment, emphasizing the tax benefits and property value increases. "Can we attend this presentation?" I asked. "It's by invitation only," she replied. "But I can get you all in as my guests." "Would that cause problems between you and your father?" My mother's question surprised me, a rare moment of concern for someone else's family dynamics. Melissa smiled wryly. "Dad and I have been disagreeing about his development approach for years. He's used to it. Besides, this is different. This is about doing what's right, not just what's profitable." "We need to be prepared," Jason added, his medical training evident in his methodical approach. "Lawrence will have economic projections, tax revenue estimates, architectural renderings, all designed to make his proposal look like the obvious choice for Millfield's future. Then we need to present an alternative vision," I said firmly. "One that shows how preserving this property contributes to the community in ways that 12 luxury townhomes never could." When they left that evening, we had the outline of a plan. Melissa would gather information about her father's presentation strategy. Jason would research similar cases where historic preservation had economically benefited communities. My mother, in perhaps the most surprising development of all, volunteered to reach out to her extensive social network in Millfield, discreetly gauging support for preservation over development. As for me, I had an idea forming, one that would require Tom's help and some intensive research into the house's history. The next morning, I called him, explaining the situation and my embryonic concept for countering Lawrence's presentation. "You want to position the house as a community asset," Tom summarized, immediately grasping my intention. "Something that serves Millfield in its preserved state better than it would as a development site." "Exactly," I confirmed. "But I need historical evidence, ways this property has been meaningful to Millfield beyond just my family's connection to it." "I think I can help with that," he said, excitement evident in his voice. The Historical Society archives have extensive documentation on the social history of Millfield's founding families. The Prescotts and later the Hamiltons were significant community figures. Give me a day or two to dive into the records. For the next 3 days, I divided my time between continuing renovation work and building our case for preservation. I pored over my grandmother's journals, extracting every reference to community events hosted at the house, garden club meetings, charity fundraisers, musical soirees that had featured now famous composers in their early careers. The house, I realized, had never been merely a private residence. It had served as a cultural nexus for Millfield across generations. Tom's research proved even more revealing. He discovered that during the Depression, my great-grandfather had used the carriage house as a makeshift medical clinic, providing free care to community members who couldn't afford the hospital. During World War II, my grandmother had hosted Red Cross gatherings where women made bandages and care packages for troops. The extensive gardens had provided vegetables for a community food-sharing program during lean times. This place has been serving Millfield since it was built, Tom observed as we spread documents across the dining room table Wednesday evening. It's never been just a status symbol or a private enclave. It's been a resource, a gathering place, a sanctuary. But how do we translate that history into something relevant for Millfield's future? I wondered aloud. Lawrence will argue that his development serves contemporary needs: housing, tax revenue, modernization. Tom leaned back in his chair, studying me thoughtfully. What if the house could serve those needs too, just in a different way? Not as luxury townhomes, but as something that honors its historical role while addressing current community priorities. The idea resonated immediately, crystallizing the vague plan that had been forming in my mind. A community cultural center, I breathed, the possibilities suddenly clear. With the main house as a museum and event space, the gardens restored as a public green area, maybe the carriage house as an educational facility or studio space for local artists. Tom's face lit up. That's brilliant, Emma. It builds on the property's historical role while creating something Millfield genuinely needs. There's no dedicated cultural center in town since the old community building was converted to office space. We worked late into the night, developing a preliminary proposal, not just a defensive strategy against Lawrence's development plan, but an affirmative vision for the property's future. By Thursday morning, we had architectural sketches, budget, projections, and a PowerPoint presentation outlining what we were calling the Hamilton House Heritage Center. My mother arrived at 5 o'clock, immaculately dressed in a tailored navy suit that conveyed authority without ostentation. She surveyed my own carefully chosen outfit, a vintage-inspired dress that nodded to the house's heritage while remaining professionally appropriate, with unexpected approval. "You look like your grandmother," she said, a note of something like wistfulness in her voice. She always knew how to command a room without seeming to try. The observation, delivered without her usual critical undertone, felt like a peace offering. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you know." Jason and Melissa picked us up in his car, tension evident in Melissa's tight smile. "Dad knows we're coming," she admitted as we drove toward the Millfield Hotel where the presentation was scheduled. One of his assistants saw my name on the guest list with 3 additions. He called this morning, asking directly if I was sabotaging his presentation. "What did you tell him?" my mother asked, her tone neutral but interested. "The truth," Melissa replied firmly. "That I believe there are better paths forward than demolishing an architectural treasure, and that his development approach needs to evolve for the modern era where preservation and progress aren't mutually exclusive." "How did he take that?" Jason asked, reaching over to squeeze her hand supportively. She smiled wryly. "About as well as you'd expect. But he can't uninvite me without causing a scene, and Lawrence Blackwell never causes scenes in public. Image is everything." The Millfield Hotel's Crystal Ballroom was already half full when we arrived, the crowd a mix of business attire and country club casual. I recognized several prominent community figures: the mayor, the bank president, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, clustered near the refreshment table. Tom was already there, having arrived early to set up our materials at a small table near the entrance. "Quite the turnout," he murmured as we joined him. "Lawrence has pulled out all the stops: open bar, catered appetizers, professional presentation, setup." "Classic Lawrence," Melissa observed. "The best of everything, especially when he's trying to win support." Lawrence himself stood near the podium, holding court with several men in expensive suits. He spotted us as we entered, his smooth smile faltering only momentarily before he excused himself from his conversation and approached. "Melissa, darling," he greeted, kissing her cheek as if no tension existed between them. His gaze swept over our group, lingering briefly on the presentation materials visible on our table. "Ms. Taylor, Mrs. Blackwell-to-be," with a nod to my mother. "Jason, I'm pleased you could all join us this evening, though I admit I'm surprised by your interest in urban development planning." "We're interested in Millfield's future," I replied evenly, "particularly when it involves historic properties with significant community value." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. Well, I think you'll find our presentation addresses those concerns comprehensively. If you'll excuse me, I need to greet the mayor." As he moved away, my mother let out a soft snort. "That man has elevated condescension to an art form. I don't know how I never noticed it before." "You were on the receiving end of his charm offensive, not his dismissal," Melissa observed shrewdly. "Dad reserves different faces for different purposes." The presentation began promptly at 6, Lawrence commanding attention with practiced ease as he outlined Millfield Luxury Homes' vision for revitalizing Wisteria Lane. Professional renderings showed sleek, modern townhomes arranged around a central courtyard where the garden currently stood, the historic house conspicuously absent from every image. "This development represents a $15 million investment in Millfield's future," Lawrence declared, his voice confident as he clicked through slides showing projected tax revenues and property value increases. 12 luxury residences, attracting professional families, supporting local businesses, and generating over $200,000 annually in property taxes alone. The presentation was polished, data-driven, and completely devoid of any acknowledgement of the historical significance being sacrificed. When Lawrence opened the floor for questions, most were softballs from business associates or interested potential buyers. Then Tom raised his hand. When Lawrence reluctantly acknowledged him, he stood, his academic demeanor lending authority to his words. "Mr. Blackwell, your economic projections are impressive," Tom began, his tone respectful, but firm. "However, your presentation makes no mention of the historical significance of the Hamilton property, which is currently under review for historic designation. Could you address how your development plans account for the cultural and architectural heritage that would be permanently lost?" A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. Clearly, not everyone had been aware of the property's historic status. Lawrence's smile remained fixed, though his eyes hardened. "The property in question, while certainly old, represents a common architectural style of its era," he replied smoothly. "Millfield has numerous examples of Victorian architecture, many in better condition and with more significant historical associations. Our plan actually honors local heritage by naming the development Wisteria Commons, a nod to the street's history. The dismissive reduction of a century-old family home to merely old and common sent a flash of anger through me. Before I could respond, however, my mother rose gracefully to her feet. "If I may," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "As Elena Hamilton Blackwell, daughter of Burton and Margaret Hamilton, I feel compelled to correct several mischaracterizations in this presentation." A murmur swept the room. My mother's maiden name and family connection to the property was evidently news to many present. Lawrence's composed expression flickered momentarily. The Hamilton house is not merely one among many Victorian homes. In Millfield, she continued, her voice gaining strength. It was built by Edward Prescott, founder of the lumber mill that constructed half the town. It later became home to Dr. Richard Hamilton, who established Millfield's first proper medical practice and whose daughter-in-law, my mother, founded the Millfield Garden Society and the town's first library reading program. She paused, looking directly at Lawrence. This isn't just about architecture, Mr. Blackwell. It's about community legacy. That house has served Millfield for generations, as a medical clinic during the Depression, as a Red Cross headquarters during World War II, as the birthplace of cultural organizations that still exist today. Erasing it for 12 luxury townhomes, regardless of their tax value, would be an irreversible loss to our community's heritage. A weighted silence followed her words. Lawrence recovered quickly, though his confidence had visibly diminished. Mrs. Blackwell, while I appreciate your family connection, progress inevitably requires difficult choices. Sentimentality cannot halt community development. This isn't about sentimentality, I interjected, rising to stand beside my mother. It's about responsible stewardship of cultural resources. I gestured to Tom, who quickly distributed our presentation folders to key community leaders in the audience. We've prepared an alternative vision for the property that serves both preservation and community needs. With that opening, I outlined our proposal for the Hamilton House Heritage Center, a community cultural facility that would preserve the historic structure while creating public garden space, event venues, and educational facilities. I emphasized the tourism potential, the educational opportunities, and most importantly, the creation of a unique community asset that honored Millfield's past while serving its future. This approach, I concluded, generates sustainable community value beyond mere tax revenue. It creates a gathering place, a cultural anchor, and a distinctive feature that sets Millfield apart from neighboring towns with cookie-cutter luxury developments. By the time I finished, the energy in the room had palpably shifted. The mayor was nodding thoughtfully, examining our proposal with evident interest. Several business owners were engaged in animated side conversations, gesturing toward our presentation materials. Lawrence attempted to regain control, dismissing our proposal as impractical idealism, lacking funding mechanisms or operational planning. But the momentum had already turned. When the Chamber of Commerce president stood to suggest forming a committee to explore both proposals more thoroughly before any development decisions were made, I knew we had achieved at least a temporary victory. As the formal presentation concluded and the attendees broke into smaller discussion groups, Lawrence approached our table, his public smile gone. "A very effective ambush," he said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I hadn't realized family loyalty was such a flexible concept, Melissa." "This isn't about loyalty, Dad," she replied calmly. "It's about doing what's right for Millfield and respecting its history. The world needs both development and preservation. They're not mutually exclusive values." "Perhaps not," he conceded stiffly. "But this particular property represents a significant investment opportunity that your future family would have benefited from directly. Jason's mother understands that, even if mine apparently doesn't." He glanced pointedly at my mother. To my surprise, she met his gaze unflinchingly. "What I understand, Lawrence, is that I've spent too many years allowing financial pragmatism to override deeper values. My parents tried to tell me, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Perhaps you aren't, either," his jaw tightened. "This discussion isn't over," he said finally, turning to me. "Your Heritage Center concept is compelling in theory, but completely unfunded in practice. Without significant capital investment, it's merely a pleasant fantasy." With that parting shot, he moved away to rejoin his business associates, leaving us in a momentary bubble of uncomfortable silence. "Well," Tom said finally, "I'd call that a successful first round. The community is engaged, the mayor seems interested, and Lawrence's steamroller approach has been at least temporarily halted." "But he's right about the funding," I admitted, the practical challenge tempering my triumph. "The renovation alone has stretched my resources considerably. Developing and operating a community center would require significant additional investment." My mother, who had been quietly observing the dispersing crowd, turned to face me directly. "Perhaps not as significant as you think," she said, her expression thoughtful. "Burton and Margaret weren't the only Hamiltons who believed in planning for the future." 2 weeks later, on a perfect early summer morning, I stood on the front porch of Hamilton House, now officially designated as a historic landmark following an expedited review by the Preservation Committee, watching as workers installed the new sign, "Hamilton House Heritage Center, Esther 2025. The property had transformed in ways I could hardly have imagined when I first took possession of the keys. The house itself gleamed with restored glory, its architectural details highlighted by historically appropriate colors, its interiors preserved where possible and thoughtfully updated where necessary. The gardens had been revitalized according to the original Prescott design, with pathways meandering through formal rose beds and naturalistic native plantings. The most significant transformation, however, had occurred not in the physical property, but in the relationships surrounding it. My mother's revelation that evening after Lawrence's presentation had stunned us all. She had inherited substantial investment accounts from her father, separate from the property assets, which she had maintained and grown over decades. Assets she was now prepared to contribute to an endowment for the Hamilton House Heritage Center. "I've spent my life believing that practical financial security was the most important legacy I could provide," she had explained as we gathered in the parlor the following day. "It took watching Emma fight for this house to make me realize what my parents understood all along, that true legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in meaning, in connection, in preservation of what matters beyond market value." The endowment, combined with historic preservation grants and community donations that materialized once the project gained momentum, provided sufficient funding to establish the center as a sustainable operation. The carriage house had been converted into classroom and studio spaces for community art programs. The main house featured exhibition areas highlighting Millfield's history, while the larger rooms served as event venues for everything from historical society meetings to small weddings and cultural performances. Tom appeared beside me on the porch, coffee mugs in hand. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, passing me the blue willow teacup I now used daily. I smiled, leaning slightly against his shoulder in a gesture that had become comfortably familiar over the past weeks. Our relationship had deepened naturally amid the whirlwind of project planning, his steady support and shared passion for preservation, creating a foundation stronger than I'd experienced in any previous relationship. "I was just thinking about transitions," I replied, watching as the sign installers secured the final mounting bracket. "How sometimes what looks like an ending, my grandparents having to leave this house, can contain the seeds of a beginning that no one could have predicted." He nodded, understanding as always. "Your grandmother knew," he observed. "That's why she left those hidden treasures for you to find. She saw the possibility even when no one else did." "She believed in this house," I agreed, "in what it represented and what it could become." A car pulled into the circular drive, my mother's Mercedes, with Jason and Melissa in the back seat. They had become regular visitors as the Heritage Center took shape, with Jason contributing medical artifacts from his grandfather's practice for the historical exhibits, and Melissa lending her art history expertise to the creation of educational programs. More surprising was the gradual thawing between my mother and me. The wounds of a lifetime couldn't heal overnight, but the shared purpose of honoring our family's legacy had created space for new understanding. She had even moved back to Millfield, purchasing a small cottage within walking distance of Hamilton House, where she now served as president of the center's board of directors. Lawrence had eventually conceded defeat with unexpected grace, redirecting his development energies to a former industrial site on Millfield's west side. The compromise preserved his business interests while protecting the town's historical district, a solution that even Melissa acknowledged represented growth for her father's perspective. As my family approached, laughing together about some shared joke, I felt my grandmother's presence almost tangibly, not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as a thread of continuity connecting past to present to future. She had trusted that this house would find its way back to where it belonged, that what had been broken could be mended, that what had been forgotten could be remembered. The afternoon sun cast golden light across the garden, illuminating the bench where my grandparents' love story had begun, and where, just last week, Tom had tentatively suggested we might consider writing our own chapter together in the coming years. The magnolia tree dropped creamy petals onto the lawn, a gentle reminder of life's constant renewal. This house, once dismissed as merely old, merely common, merely a development opportunity, now stood as a living testament to the power of preservation, not just of architecture, but of memory, of connection, of purpose. It had survived neglect and threatened demolition to emerge as something both old and new, both personal and public, both a tribute to the past and a gift to the future. My mother joined me on the porch steps, her hand briefly touching my shoulder, a small gesture. That would have been unimaginable months ago. "It's beautiful, Emma," she said simply. "Your grandparents would be proud. I'm proud." The words settled around me like a benediction, unexpected and profound. I had restored more than a house. I had reclaimed my place in a family that had once declared this house was only for real family. Now we understood, all of us, that family, like history, like legacy, like home, was not defined by blood alone, or by convenience, or by profit potential. It was defined by love, by choices made and sustained, by commitment to something larger than individual desire. The ship's bell on the back porch rang out suddenly. Tom had adopted my grandfather's sunset tradition, marking the transition from day to evening as a moment worthy of acknowledgement. The clear tone echoed across the garden, calling us together as it had called generations before us. I smiled, lifting my blue willow teacup in a silent toast to the house that had waited for me, to the grandmother who had trusted me to return, and to the future that now stretched before us. Not perfect, not without challenges, but rich with possibility and connection. Real family, real home, real legacy, all intertwined in ways I was only beginning to fully understand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.